dos ponencias que continúan profundizando las reflexiones en torno a los procesos creativos, las prácticas colaborativas y el diseño como herramienta de intercambio y construcción colectiva. Les comentamos que las dos ponencias de este bloque se desarrollarán en inglés. En ese sentido, si requieren traducción simultánea, los invitamos a acercarse al servicio de traducción, el cual se encuentra disponible en la puerta de ingreso para que puedan obtener sus audífonos. Agradecemos a todas y a todos y a todos los asistentes que nos acompañan de manera presencial y así como quienes nos siguen a través de la transmisión en vivo desde el YouTube de la Facultad de Arte y Diseño. Les recordamos que pueden encontrar información actualizada sobre las ponencias y el programa del encuentro en nuestro Instagram, @amdt.puc. Antes de iniciar este bloque, no queremos dejar de recordarles que mañana tendremos dos actividades muy importantes en el campus PUC. Por la tarde se realizará el masterclass de Ragna Frodadottir, The Inner Path of Creation, en el salón N113 del pabellón de MacGregor. Y más adelante, a las 6:30, los esperamos en el desfile de egresados que se llevará a cabo en la sala Winternitz de la Facultad de Arte en el campus PUC, ubicado en la avenida Universitaria 1801 San Miguel. Para iniciar este bloque, presentamos nuestra primera conferencia titulada Diseñar en Relación, Creatividad y Colaboración, a cargo de Andrea Camarosano. Diseñador y artista, nacido en Italia, graduado por el Departamento de Moda de la Real Academia de Amberes. Camarosano trabajó como diseñador para Walter van Beirendonck, para su propia marca homónima y para las marcas italianas Iceberg y MSGM. Además de su experiencia en el mundo del diseño, Camarosano ha colaborado con varios artistas como Narcisse Tourtois y Ronald Studd, y fue artista residente en el Museo Quartier de Viena y en Ámsterdam, donde exploró la relación entre el cuerpo y la prenda a través de construcciones corporales interactivas. Las obras de Andrea se han expuesto en el MoMA PS1 de Nueva York, Selfridge de Londres, Museo de la Triennale Milán, la Bienal de Moda de Arnhem. En 2018, Camarosano fundó Clutter, un proyecto para la exploración de métodos creativos basado en la performance, la improvisación y la colaboración. El proyecto se lanzó con un performance interactivo en la Galería Salvatore Lanteri. Con Clutter, Camarosano ha realizado trabajos artísticos y editoriales para varios clientes, entre los que incluye Dover Street Market, Londres, Hunter Fashion Magazine, King Kong Magazine, Rain Magazine y de la República. A través de Clutter, Camarosano ha llevado a cabo talleres y actividades colaborativas con diferentes escuelas como la Design Academy Eindhoven y la Head Geneve. En 2021, Clutter inició una colaboración con el IES Caterina de Siena y el Ayuntamiento de Milán, Departamento de Bienestar y Servicios Sociales, para crear una plataforma de formación social dirigida a estudiantes adolescentes en el campo de diseño de moda y textil. Camarosano ha sido profesor, coordinador de cursos de Polimoda, Florencia, y actualmente imparte clases en la nueva Academia di Belle Arti Milán, y en la actualidad es investigador doctoral de la Real Academia de Bellas Artes de Amberes, en Departamento de Moda, en colaboración con la Universidad de Amberes. Sin más preámbulos, les presento a Andrea Camarosano.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Okay, and this is the... Okay. Muchas gracias y muchas gracias a la Pontificia Universidad Católica, a Milena y a Juliano, a Andrea, todo el team por organizar este evento muy importante. Y I wish di poter hacer el intervento in spagnolo, but il mio spagnolo non è molto buono, so I'm going to have this presentation in English. Okay, but it feels a bit strange to speak in English where I speak Italian. We're so close. Maybe we could try next time. Okay, so hola, soy Andrea. Quickly, my background, which is also related to what I will be speaking about. My formation was in Amberes, in Antwerp, which is a school and an environment very much focused on experimentation in fashion. So it's an art school that has historically a department of fashion that is very, it attracts a lot of people in fashion that are looking to study with a bit exploratory mindset. And so that was very much part of, it's definitely part of my angle, my point of view on fashion. Fashion is a very wide field I am aware that I have a bit a bias, a focus on this artistic, and I find it important, exploration in fashion. And then for over 10 years, I was working as a designer in very small or medium-sized or also larger companies. And this for me led me to experience different ecosystem of production. And in fact, after a little over 10 years of designing, I had a bit of a breakdown in a good way. I was a bit questioning the reason why I was creating things and how I was using my creativity. And that's when these are some images about my work, for instance, for Walter van Beirendonck. I will speak about my breakdown later then. But I like to show these images because in one image, in the first one, there is this fabric which was developed with a very classic manufacturer in France called Malia Kent. And for me, this, when I was working in this, for this brand, for this designer, I realized that, the making of things, even if you work with someone, with a maker who is rooted in heritage and in tradition, you can use that knowledge to go very far creatively. And so it was the collaboration with this kind of manufacturers that made me think about the things that I'm doing now. And the second image is a collaboration with an artist, Erwin Wurm from Austria. This image instead is about the work I did for my own small private label. And again, it was a collaboration with the pattern makers. So in this moment when I started thinking, yeah, maybe I create like a small brand, I went back to Italy. And the biggest resource we have in Italy is a lot of makers and manufacturers. And once again, for me, design and ideas came by going very much in detail in how things are made. And this was a project where the design was not so much my initial idea, but it was working with pattern makers to figure out how we could engineer all the parts of a garment that can be assembled in so many ways and can be versatile. So after this experience, as I said, I started questioning why I was designing and how I was using my creativity. And as Andrea mentioned, I founded this project, which for me it's a plural and diffused creative studio, in the sense that at every project I put together a different team of people. And it's called clutter. Clutter in English means things scattered around. And for me, it is a symbol, a manifesto of the freedom I wanted to take to, at every project, decide how I would be working and how I would be putting together different resources. And so give myself more freedom to design, not just collections, but I think what better describes it is to design projects that bring people together and create relations. And this little motto is, creativity is what I treasure. I find it's an endless source of beautiful things. And then you can use creativity in education, so in the transmission of your knowledge and in the transmission of tools and in empowering people with the instruments. And that is very transformative. And so related to the conference theme of today, ultimately, I think that design used in this way has the power to transform society, and I think this is what we're talking about. So there is a website with some images and actually an explanation of some of the projects more in detail. Okay, so the presentation today will have 3 parts. The first one is a framework of creativity and why we need to talk about creativity, I think. The second one is a case study coming from a PhD research that I had the opportunity to conduct with the Royal Academy of Antwerp and the University of Antwerp. So even if I'm based in Milan, I still work with the school in Antwerp. It's quite close, luckily, in Europe. And so the second part is about going in detail in this case study, which was, for me, this research gave me the opportunity to cover something which I found out is a little bit of a blind spot in, in academic research on creativity. Because there is a lot of research on creativity in, like with kids, in pedagogy, and also in organizations. But actually found out that in fashion education, there wasn't so much a questioning of what is creativity and how it reflects on the teaching methods. So finally, the third part, after this case study from my research, is about what kind of applications and opportunities I think there can be in education, but also in the fashion system. And I'm curious to hear your ideas about it. So why creativity? And I ask myself this a lot because in fact there's so many important issues in the fashion system and in the world today. Sustainability is one of them, inclusion. Also when I started this research in 2020, AI was just starting to, to be like diffused on a large scale. And so I think, these are all really important subjects to talk about today. But nevertheless, I do think that creativity is important because we still talk a lot about it in the industry. It's definitely a driver of value. There is a whole narrative in fashion. Fashion is an industry that is always, it's living on a constant, proposal of new things. And we spoke about tendencias. And so creativity definitely has a value in the narrative of the system. But at the same time, I think that though in the fashion we speak a lot about creativity, we use the term in a very loose way. And I think it's worth taking a closer look at how creativity can work. And also, yes, as I say here, I should read actually my slides, but I think there is, in fashion, for instance, one of the things that I notice is a gap between the ideators and the makers, a gap in how, people's authorship and work is valorized, in which the, access, salaries, and, very important things are handled, has to do with the idea of who is the creator. And again, I think we spoke about this also in the morning, about the narrative of the lone genius and so on. And the reason for having a look at creativity in this more thorough and deep way, and so questioning, value and processes, the reason to do that in education is because I believe in this way we can empower a generation to face the fashion system today. Because what is happening today in fashion, and I speak with a lot of people, and so do you, and I think we all agree that there's a series of systems that were, a given, that are disintegrating. And in some cases, it's a good thing. Actually, I think it's good, like we were used to like having gatekeepers, for instance, that decided, who could take part in the system, who could take not. So I think this integration is also a positive thing. But at the same time, it means that today as a designer, it's not enough that you have ideas and that you make something, some new objects, or you present your collections. You really have to find out how you're going to produce them, how you're going to distribute them, how you're going to, create around yourself a team and a network that can sustain your creativity. So I think this is why it's worth spending this first part of the presentation with a little bit of, academic, maybe, reflection on creativity. One thing which I find interesting, and I think, I want to spend a few words about the PhD in the arts. So In Europe, PhD in the arts are organized by putting together an art school with a university, because art schools, they realize that they don't always have the ability and the know-how to think academically. So when you do this kind of PhD, you have supervisors from the art, from the practice, and supervisors from the academic part. And I think for me it was good to discover this whole new world, I think as Sandra was saying this morning, of the lecturas, of reading, because it can give an interesting angle to some things that in practice you have experience and you recognize, but then it's true that you can complete them and you find yourself thinking, aha, I'm not crazy. Actually, this thing that I experience in practice actually has a name and I can learn things. So it's true that creativity is not like fantasy and it's not like innovation. Fantasy is more subjective. It doesn't need to have an application in the real world, and that's a beautiful thing of it. It's, you know, like children have fantasy, and we should always keep fantasy with us. The other thing is innovation. So fantasy is more subjective. It's really, really more personal than something that has an effect in the real world. And innovation, on the contrary, is more objective. So normally, innovation is something that is applied to a process and improves it in a certain way that can be documented and can be quantified. In fact, innovation is very used as a term in the tech industry. Sorry, the translation works? Okay. Creativity, instead, is, and I read by a agreed definition, an ability to produce responses to a task that are personal, innovative, and appropriate. So we can see that in fashion, because in fashion, which is a kind of a form of applied art, what we create is, is normally meant to have an application in the real world, to be worn by someone. It's a garment, so it has a certain shape because it will have to fit a certain body. And then, of course, if you look at fashion as an industry, you want to be able to reproduce it and to sell it. So in that case, a creative response is appropriate. But appropriate also means that sometimes what is appropriate for you is to generate an idea that is provocative or shocking, or that people can't wear, or that it's an idea that is criticizing. So appropriate can mean a lot of things, but it means that when you're creative, you're thinking, okay, what is my goal for this thing that I'm working on? And you work to go, to reach that goal. And then it's innovative. Innovative doesn't mean that something looks, like it's never been done before, because we said that maybe everything has been done. But innovative means it's the first time for you to have that kind of response. Okay, so it's the first time that you come to a certain response. And then, and I think this is the trickiest part, it's also personal. So you use your experience, your maybe quirky way of seeing things, and in that sense, creativity, that's the second part of the definition, which is very interesting, is a response that doesn't only use linear processes, like following instructions or following a recipe, but many times it requires that you take a step, you take a jump, it's called divergent thinking. So you go in a direction which is, it's not in any manual, it's not in any instruction. And so this is a definition which, as someone that works in education, I think this is what for me is the goal of working towards. So when we work with designers, that's the idea. Okay, be personal, be innovative, think about your goal, and at some point also take a step and try something that is not written in any manual. The second thing about creativity is that, in fact, there's a big difference between the creativity you can use in an individual project and the creativity you use when you work for a company or for a team. And these are also psychologically very different things. So there is a huge psychological aspect in creativity. And this is why I think it's very important to rehearse collaboration in education, so you can learn, given who are the people in your team, how you can be creative yourself and how you can activate also their way of working in a creative way. And I think this is what we see a lot in the industry. Everybody knows in the industry that behind this, amazing works that we see that are revolutionary and, new aesthetics, everybody knows that behind that there is not just the creative director, but there are like teams of designers and of pattern makers and of textile designers. But despite people in the industry knowing it, the narrative around fashion is still very much seduced by that romantic idea of the creative genius. And I mean, it's both things in a way are true. There are some individuals which have this outstanding level of creativity, but this is not very useful for us in education, because in education there's a plurality and we want to consider nuances of creativity, and so we need to step out of this narrative. It's a great narrative to sell garments and to write a piece on a magazine, but the reality is different, and we should use that reality in education, I believe. And then, again, creativity is very different according to the context in which you work. So, in fact, what I find interesting in research, theoretical research on this field, is that until the 80s, most of the thinking of creativity was focused on what I said before, like individuals or examples of outstanding creativity, like Picasso, Van Gogh, or Marie Curie. And then from the 80s on, especially from the work of Teresa Amabile, which was a social psychologist, she started to look at creativity in that sense, as a psychological behavior of a person that works in an environment. And one of the main influences the environment has on the individual creative is motivation. And again, I think this is so important in education, because there's not much that we can do if we don't create a motivation to engage with the work. And starting from that research from Teresa Amabile, later research expanded this idea of the context. So taking into account the influences of an organization, the influences of teams, the feedback loops between the creative individual in a team, in the organization, and how that impacts motivation, for instance, experience, and all these things. So saying that creativity is situated in a context means that in school, in education, for instance, when we are assessing the creativity of something, we should also think, okay, but how was this person motivated to work? What kind of resources were given so that their creativity could be sustained? So we really think of the school as an environment. And the last part, again, has to do with the context, and has to do with actually something that has not really been solved about creativity. So is creativity something which is domain general, is a technical term? So you are creative in everything. You're a creative person, and anything you do will be creative if you want. Or is creativity something that is specific to a domain? And I think, so in academic terms, there's different schools arguing for different interpretations. But I think for us in education, it's very important to consider that a person might give creative responses, so non-ordinary responses, in a certain task, for instance, pattern making or print design, and could actually give ordinary responses in other fields or tasks. And I think we see this all the time, and I think as teachers, one of the main things you have to do is to be able to, together with young designers, to see where is the potential and how the potential can grow, and to also admit that, maybe you're not going to be, amazing in everything you do, but find out where you're amazing. Or it's not even about being amazing, but, where you can give that response that is personal and also appropriate. And I think this realization is very important, for instance, in assessment, but also in admission exams, for instance. And then speaking of artistic education, that is valuing, like at least in words, is valuing creativity. But then all these 4 points, I think, are important for, in education to reflect, okay, we are assessing creativity, we want to stimulate creativity, we want to teach creativity, but okay, what exactly are we speaking about in these terms? And so this was a bit the theoretical base, and I will drink some water actually. Okay, so this was the base for me to think about what kind of framework can be used to define creativity in these broader terms. So once again, the point of this research was to focus on education and to focus on the Royal Academy of Arts in Antwerp and to propose a reflection on creativity that could expand what we are doing already as a school. And so to consider creativity on two axes. One is there is individual creativity and there is collaborative creativity, and we would like to empower students to choose to perform equally well in both. And the second axis is creativity, in a generic application, which I think in fashion is mainly storytelling. So having a story. Fashion is not just about, the products, but it's also about seducing people, with imagination, with a story, or, a story can also be a social story, like a social empowerment. So being creative informing that kind of concept, but also be creative in a specific domain. So in a specific skill, and this is why this research has a specific focus on art-oriented education, but also on skill-based education. I'm a person that works very much on, making. I'm more like a practitioner than a theorist. So for me, it was important that we could discover some things about creativity in specific, skill sets and this is the a representation of this global dimension of creativity. Creativity is moving in this kind of sphere, and it can be domain specific. You can be a creative pattern maker, or it can be domain general. You can be a pattern maker that can tell a story and interpret a social behavior. It's also individual. You can have resort to a certain way of creating when you're working by yourself, but then when you're working with others, you will consider also their way of making, or you will communicate with them in a way that is appropriate to their style of working. What was a challenge for me in this research was to find something that could be usable both in theory and in practice. Because as I said, I feel, that a lot of the research I was encountering was really interesting in terms of theory, but I was like, okay, but what do these things look like in the end? Because in fashion education, young people, they come and they're excited to create and they want to make something which is pretty and beautiful, exciting. So we need to give a body, a substance to this creativity we're speaking about. And I had this idea that was really coming from practice, because I noticed that when we are in the laboratory, in school or outside school, all our communication is happening not only verbally, but through the samples we create. We saw in your archive magazine the sketchbooks. So when we see the sketchbook, we understand that all the communication, or such a big part of the communication, is through drawing, through samples, through mock-ups. And so I thought this was for me a way to bridge theory and practice, to use these things as the sketches, the samples, the mock-ups, to use them as a way to observe the process, and I call them creative languages. So creative languages are a form of personal expression, but also they're a form of communication with others. Could be teachers, or it could be, the people you work with. And they integrate the non-tangible elements, so your personality sometimes, but also tangible elements. So, you know, we can actually use them. We can actually use a mock-up to, you know, make a garment and then to take a picture. And so I was not looking to classify this kind of languages in, you know, under their form, because there's so many of them. Just think, you know, think all the languages you've used in your magazine. There's really so many of them. But I thought about framing them in a way that could be more general and potentially could be applied not only to fashion, to creative languages in fashion, but also to other fields. And this again is something that comes from my observation in my practice, and something I was surprised when I'm working with other people on creative projects. There is an artistic component. I mean, when you show a sketch or a sample, sometimes the you know, the magic part is that it just looks pretty or it's exciting. It has an aesthetic form, and this is related to your subjective, you know, to your taste, to your, I don't know. This is really the part of fantasy we cannot observe. Then they also have a technical component, which is objective, and this allows actually other people to make something of it. If you give a sketch to a pattern maker, yes, it's in your personal style, but some things are, you know, conventions to show this is a dotted line, so it's a top stitching, this thing is a zipper. So that's the technical component, let's say. And then there is an interpersonal component, or better, actually an interactional component when we're speaking about the languages. And I find that this component, you know, going on in my research was the one that I became more and more fascinated with, because I think, you know, there's, for instance, there is a whole field of artistic education in which a focus is given to, you know, that aspect of creative languages. There is technical education in which a focus is given on learning to make, you know, spec sheets and clear technical drawings. But in fact, the interactional component, so how is the way that you work inviting or allowing other people to work with you? And so my research got really focused on, you know, when we teach skills in school, for instance, we teach them so you can be artistic, we teach them so you can be, you know, technically sound, but also teaching them so that you can get the best out of others when you work with them, and vice versa. So the importance of these three components, again, it's an intuition that I had from you know, my practice, from experience, and then through the research I was observing how does this work and how we can use it in education. And the idea is that, you know, in the kind of skills that we teach, in the kind of creative languages we use, having a component that is pretty and beautiful and aesthetic can be, you know, a way of, for instance, motivating people, of making people curious. It impacts the individual dimension. Having a component which allows a translation and allows, you know, technical quality and execution is important, so that you can go deep into your domain and you can learn also pattern making, or you can learn textile design or drawing. Having a component that is interactional enables you to perform in collaborative projects. And again, I think collaborative projects in fashion education, at least in my experience, are not always so loved by people, because there is always this frustration that sometimes, you know, you have something in mind, but the group doesn't understand it, or you want to be polite and you don't, you know, it feels that it's rude to push your idea onto a group. So once again, you know, all this thinking and all this blah blah, but I found that I really needed it so that I could find a way to be better in the collaborative project that I organize. And I give you some examples of how, okay, we spoke of domains, like somebody can be creative in drawing, or somebody is good at drawing, or somebody needs to make a drawing. And in fashion, drawings are very much used to communicate ideas. And indeed, in some schools, drawing is the starting point. And then when you look closer into this general domain of drawing, there's different kinds of drawings. There's the fashion illustration, which can be more freehand and consider the full body, consider also style and attitude. So you can see in the scheme is something more oriented toward artistic element, is less precise, more interpretative, more aesthetic. Vice versa, you have technical drawings that are aimed at a less personal and more objective communication. So for instance, a pattern maker that is receiving the first drawing as a piece of communication has a lot of space to make decisions because a lot of things are still open. And in the second case, when you give this to your factory, your pattern maker, it's much more codified. You have the front and back, you can read exactly what is being asked of in these drawings. And so these are examples of how creative languages can possess elements which are more artistic or more technical or more interactional. In the field of making, so this domain in Europe, we sometimes call it coupe in French, but it's the cutting of garments, and this can be obtained through draping on the dress form or through pattern making. And once again, draping is something that is, through draping you obtain on the dress form something which immediately has aesthetic value, but if you work through pattern making, it's very codified. Not everybody can understand a pattern. But at the same time, in terms of interaction, for instance, it's normally quite difficult for many people to work on the dress form like this because you're going to be too many hands all at once, and everybody has their feeling and has their interpretation. Vice versa, pattern making could be more interactional in the sense that the garment can be divided into different garment parts, and different people can make their experiment on some of these garment parts. And similar with textiles. In textiles, you can have, you can work directly on colors and on like compositions, or there is, more technical languages that are needed when you need, for instance, to, make the file, to design a jacquard textiles, and you need to know a lot of things about codifications and a lot of tools. So it feels definitely more and more technical than, hand painting on a fabric. And I think this is my hypothesis, and what I'm thinking is how we teach these things in school and how we empower through these skills students is not just having effects on their ability to be, to create, beautiful or new things, but it also, and maybe in a more subtle way, influences also the way that they see their role in collaborating with others. I don't know how I'm doing with time. Okay, maybe it's quite a lot of time. Just to show quickly then the studio project, this is the second part of the presentation, is the case study that I conducted with the 52 students at the Royal Academy of Arts in Antwerp. And the question behind this is, fashion education is normally, and like in many times, having as the key exercise the realization of an individual collection. And through this project, I wanted to question, alternatives to these individual collections, and how could it be possible to use that space of the collection to create this collaboratively in group. In this project, the 52 students were divided in six groups. So each group was like a mini studio, like a design studio. And in each studio, you had different people working on textile, working on drawings, and working on the making of garments. And this was something that the students decided themselves. So they decided, I like to draw, or I want to try to be the one that draws, or I like to work on textiles, or I want to be, making the garments. And this was the first way of addressing that aspect of, let's realize, where do you decide to be creative, and how that part of your creativity will be combined with the creativity of the other people in the group. So this is an example of how in the textile team you could have somebody who was working on prints, somebody working on embroideries, and somebody working, for instance, on dyeing fabric samples, giving color ideas. And the whole point of the project was to help students to reflect on how, even if they work on a part of this process, they contribute creatively to the ultimate result. And then what was, the output of this project was to build a series of, maps of this process and to realize what was happening in this, throughout this activity with 4 possible scenarios. In one scenario, people are exchanging artistic ideas and technical ideas, but not everyone is being creative. And this was the case in which there were some people in the group being like the creative directors. So they were saying like, these are the ideas, you guys are great at executing, make it for me. The second scenario was lots of artistic ideas and lots of interaction and everybody working on the same things because everybody liked each other so much, but nothing came out. Something came out, of course. But third scenario was, the precise ones, like machines. Okay, we have a plan, we make this, everybody does a part of the project, very efficient, but in the end, asking like, okay, is this personal? Were you using your personality? Or actually not, we just made it. So the efficient collaboration. And then the fourth scenario is the one which we would ideally, in a dream world, we would want in our company, in our design studio, that all these elements, everybody in each team is able, through their textiles or through the patterns or through the drawings, is able to provide in a personal way a part of an appropriate solution. And that's where creative collaboration in the making of a collection happens. And if I think about the industry, this is the rare example of a studio in which everybody is allowed to provide their solution and to be fulfilled. So from these results, actually I was very lucky that out of 6 groups, all these scenarios were, could be observed. And again, this is just a case study. So for me, the sense of this is that we can do projects in education where we collectively work on tracking the process and understanding what happened and pointing some moments in which something important happened and helping students and teachers to reflect, okay, we want this to happen more often in the future. How do we work? How do we use our creative languages? And this is the example of group 2. So I'm very happy there was one group actually in which I could observe this very plural, you can see there's the drawing team, mock-up, the making team and the textile team, and they were continuously proposing ideas to each other, and this idea sparked a certain textile gave an idea to a designer, a certain way of cutting a garment gave an idea for a textile, and this is kind of how we ideally we would like to work in this field, where there is not just a top-down hierarchy of a creative director and then people executing, but everybody is aware of how they can contribute personally, but also in a way that it's helping the project, not just yourself, but is helping the result for all the group. So something which I will skip on some slides, but something that I noticed, so this project was like a case study, but I actually repeated it again in a few times, and one key finding for me in this project was that the environment influences a lot how people are working. And for instance, to give an example, in Antwerp, the way of teaching is that you start by drawing, then you make your prototype, and you choose your fabric. And so this, I saw that it influenced the students working in the project in the way that they perceive that if you're drawing, then you're the one that gives the idea to who is going to make the garments and make the fabric. So for instance, all the students in the textile team were like sitting like this, and I was like, why aren't you trying something? Oh, but I'm waiting for the designers to give me the drawing, because this was kind of the mindset enforced by the school. And every environment will have some sort of logic. So I think it's important to try and repeat these experiments in different environments. And again, there's not a solution, but just speak about, okay, notice what happens when the logic is different, when the environment is different. And so I invited some of the groups from the previous project to work outside school in a series of factories. I think I have an image. So what happened when we were working in the factories was that even the students that work more in a top-down way, you know, I am the creative director, all of a sudden were open and they were taking ideas from the workers, for instance. They improvised because a certain color was there on the shelf, and all of a sudden they were open to, you know, not start from their idea and have someone execute it, but they were really listening, you know, to the specialized workers and to their inspiration. They were much more open. So this gave me the idea that textiles are really, in education, they can be a great tool, you know, to obtain, to help people to collaborate. Because textiles and materials in general, they have an objective quality. So some things you can do with them, some things maybe, some things definitely not. So they're a way of agreeing for a group on what you can do. At the same time, they're also very open because they are sensorial. They have, you know, color and aesthetic qualities and haptic qualities like touch. So I started to use more and more textiles in this kind of projects. But I think, and I want to say, yeah, something about textiles that is important in this sense is that I started to realize that in the Italian industry, in the Italian textile industry, the way of you know, producing ideas and producing products, it's actually really like very much diffused and very much in this way. So we have a few companies which are verticalized, so all the processes are happening in the companies, but in fact the model is really about like a lot of very small companies hyper specialized in a part of the process, and they all come together under the coordination of converter companies which interface with you know, the design studio, but also the fairs, the trends, the commercial offices. So in this sense, working on the textile in educational project is a way both to enhance collaboration, but also to help students explore that, you know, beyond the design of garments, there are actually so many passages and so many people involved whose creativity deserve to be accommodated and to be valorized and to be considered. And I think this is actually the end for now. And I'm waiting for your questions and ideas.
Si alguno tuviese una pregunta.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. Congratulations for your work. And I want to ask do you think that cultural aspects can affect the implementation of this framework in different educational scenarios?
Thank you for your question. It's a very good question, and it's something also that my research stopped at. When I started this research, actually, my plan was to consider so many aspects of what I mentioned, the environment, including the cultural aspect, because these are schools in which we have students coming from so many backgrounds. But in fact, at some point I realized that it was important, in order to have something coming out of it, it was important that I should restrict the framework to the aspect of the creative languages. And in my hopes, this idea of people communicate through this sort of languages, and these languages having this characteristic, is something that we could observe in different contexts and different scenarios. But what do you think? What do you think? I mean, let's speak about it because it's important.
Yes, I think that it maybe has a significant impact because We are different in each country. We have different habits. We are used to doing different things. Our thoughts also are different, and maybe we need some more experiments, no, in order to prove this proposal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also that the whole point of doing this kind of research is to have an application that goes deeper in society. I want to maybe mention that one of the applications coming out of this research was a social project we did like in Milan for a few years now, which is like a free fashion formation for teenagers in minor opportunity. So probably also in that aspect, we were not really considering, we work with the social services and with the city of Milan to launch a call for teenagers, because again, maybe it doesn't have to do with the cultural background, but more like with the social background. So something which I realized and became more and more involved with is that fashion education in Italy, higher education is mostly private, and it's I don't know, it definitely cuts out a whole like part of the youth population. And so what came out of this project was to use this collaborative mindset to organize this kind of courses and this kind of experiences for teenagers which were involved in technical education. But again, it was more about expanding the social, how do you say, the social aspect, and not so much focused on the cultural aspect. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
¿Alguna otra duda, pregunta?
Hi, so more specifically talking about the education side of and social part of the presentation, I was wondering which strategies or like ways do you think are better in the case of, well, collaborative artistic representations or projects like, I don't know, making a collection? Which strategies do you think are the best when getting to a main idea and start to produce? Because, for example, in social projects or collective projects, it's like if everyone's drawing, then there's a moment where everyone's need to decide which are the things that are better from each of the drawing. And it's kind of like a, I don't know if say a difficulty while making collaborative, collaborative projects. So which one are the best strategies?
No, absolutely, and that's a very important point. So we're speaking about bottom-up creative processes, and so in this project, what was essential to organize, otherwise the project fails, is that you need to provide the students or the participant with the space and the possibility and the infrastructure to visualize collectively ideas, to communicate them openly. So we speak about mood boards, for instance. So in certain cases in fashion education, the mood board is like your kind of your sacred board where you show your ideas. But in fact, a mood board or like a visual board in a design studio is a tool which is constantly evolving. So where everybody is uploading their ideas so that everybody in the studio can visualize them and be aware of how the project is moving in real time. And so these kind of pin boards, in all the schools that I worked, they just carrying this 2 meters by 1 meter pin boards. And speaking of strategy, the first step is to be able for everybody to contribute to this in real time and to organize moments of discussion for the whole team to look at what is happening and to make, to discuss, okay, these elements could go together, this we have to edit out, maybe there can be a vote, I don't know. Bottom-up processes, these are the kind of strategies, right? Visualization, communication, democratic decision, but I would also say never taking decision on the base of something of a concept, which is abstract, and always trying to making proposal and decision with something concrete. Because I find it's kind of unfair, right? If you have to convince other people that on an abstract level, that is not a good idea because and because. So I always say the strategy is like, you think these two things work together, make a sample. Okay, let's try it out. Put it up, let's discuss it. And I think this need for concreteness is something which is so important in education, but also in the industry. It makes people feel good that you can just say like, look, it works, or look, it didn't work, or okay, next time. But absolutely, then the job is to, you know, you have to organize the working space in a way that allows this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Ay.
Muchas preguntas, molto bene.
So I wanted to ask you, in these studies you've done as a teacher, because I am also a teacher, and for me sometimes it's a conflict to guide the students. I mean, how much do you, what is the role you did in these studies? Because the group can behave different depending on the individuals, but also they are, I mean, your presence as a teacher is very important to them also, and sometimes the words or the advices we give kind of like shape also the way the decisions they make. So how, I don't know, what are the recommendations, or I don't know, students sometimes are expecting to have a proof of the teachers to keep designing. So how that also changes how the group behaves, or what should we do?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's an important question also, and yeah, complex one. But definitely, my so one good aspect of, you know, having tried this project and then repeating them is that I was able to observe that in the first cases I was very much present, and then the longer, you know, with experience, then my role became much more that of a facilitator and less of a teacher. And also it depends very much on the environment, because in the case of this project, in the first iteration it was in school and you have to explain, okay, we're doing this, you are expected to use pinboards and you're expected to take decisions in this way, and you really have to guide, I mean, very much the way of working, the working style. So I don't really say this is good, this is bad, but I understand that by deciding, okay, this is the working style, you know, you influence things. But then, for instance, when I repeated this the second time in the factory environment, it was, you know, my role switched very much to the back. First of all, because the students already knew what was, you know, asked. They had 1 year more of experience. It was 1 year after, so they had 1 year more experience. They had internalized. They had, you know, all of a sudden this project and this way of working was more natural for them. So they were not coming to me to ask for advice or for things. So it was also easier for me. So it's a win-win, actually. No, but that said, the teacher, you know, having a leadership role, which is also one of the things at some point was in the slide. You know, leadership roles are so important, and also as a strategy. It's true that in a group you will need a certain leadership, but there can be leadership styles which are more like a facilitator of, you know, communication, or what we call a positive actor. So somebody that can have a good influence on the project because of giving resources or spacing, or helping people to solve problems, you know, to diffuse tension, for instance. That's a positive actor. And I think my role in education is, I would like it ideally more and more to be this kind of role. And also it's about the collaboration among teachers, right? Because you have teachers on different courses, and so these kind of reflections, I find it was very useful for, you know, the whole teaching team to understand how we can also give more space to each other and and be positive actors. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to remind you, you didn't tell us about your breakdown.
My breakdown. No, it was just that. Yeah, my breakdown was like, what am I doing? You know, why am I designing? Garments and not, I don't know, designing. I don't know. I started putting fruit and vegetables on top of. I started working with, I don't know, making hats with bananas, these kind of things. So that was very important for me. It was oxygen. Improvising.
Well, thank you very much, Andrea.
Thank you so much.
It has a pleasure to listen to you, and gracias a todos los demás. Ahora tenemos un pequeño coffee break y regresamos en unos 15 minutos. Muchísimas gracias por asistir. Recuerden que pueden quedarse con los audífonos siempre y cuando hayan dejado sus DNIs ahí. Esta segunda ponencia se titula Ruta del tejido, diseñar, curar y crear, y está a cargo de Ragna Frodadottir, que es una directora, curadora, diseñadora textil y consultora de tendencias con una trayectoria internacional de más de 3 décadas en los campos del diseño, la moda, el arte textil y la educación. Actualmente se desempeña como directora de Edelcourt en Nueva York, donde lidera las operaciones diarias de una de las agencias de análisis de tendencia más influyentes del mundo, asesorando industrias creativas vinculadas a la moda y el estilo de vida. Paralelamente, Ragna es directora de New York Textile Month, un festival anual que celebra la innovación y la cultura textil contemporánea. Bajo su liderazgo, el proyecto se consolidó como una organización sin fines de lucro, ampliando su impacto público a través de exposiciones, talleres, premios internacionales y colaboraciones con artistas, instituciones y comunidades creativas de todo el mundo. Asimismo, preside el Dorothy Waxman International Textile Design Prize, apoyando a nuevas generaciones de diseñadores textiles. Su compromiso con la educación ha sido un constante en su carrera, ha ocupado cargos académicos claves como jefe de departamento de textiles, donde desarrolló programas educativos, organizó viajes de investigación y fortaleció redes entre escuelas, estudios y artistas. Actualmente colabora con Parsons The New School como enlace del programa MFA en textiles, facilitando experiencias profesionales y vínculos con estudios especializados en Nueva York. Así que muchas gracias, Ragna.
Gracias. Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. Hi. It's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me to come to Peru and to speak about my work. I'm very glad and honored to be here in this, and I'm so impressed by this gathering, this symposium that you're hosting. I'm going to talk about my work and about myself and a little bit about my journey as a creative person, and artist and designer and curator and director and whatever I need to be to be who I am. And it's going to be a lot based, I'm a little bit confused. Is it like this? All right, yeah. So it's going to be based on my personal work and how my personal work is connected to what I also do today for other people. But first of all, I just want to tell you that I come from Iceland, which is the little country there in the middle of nowhere. It's a big island with a very small population. Now we are, I think, 400,000, but when I was growing up, it was like 150,000, and then it was like 250,000 people. And when I wanted to study fashion design, I had to go abroad to do that. There was not even fashion studies were not taught there at the time. So this is my country. It's a lot of nature, very intense nature, and we have volcanoes and geysers and icebergs and glaciers, and we have a lot of contrast, and we have incredible intense weather that I think has formed us as people, because we are very resilient and we are very resourceful people. And in the lecture I'm going to give tomorrow is a lot about those qualities that we get from growing up in those circumstances. So I'm first going to I'm going to start talking about the first show I created. And that was it was a show that I curated about my own work. And it was in one of the museums in Iceland. And I showed 9 floating dresses. They all had the same shape, different fabric manipulation, different decorations. I showed also photographs of women wearing their own clothes designed by me as a family portrait. I moved my studio in the museum and I performed there for 3 weeks with my people that worked in my studio. And so we just moved the studio as it was. And this was my first experience of bringing my work into this context of a curator. And at that time, it wasn't so, it's a long time ago, and at the time it wasn't so like we have curators today. The curators are much more present today, but there I was the one that curated my show. I was invited to do the exhibition here. And part of the show was this work here, which speaks about my own identity. It's a self-portrait of me wearing clothing that are embroidered in my own fabric, and sitting on a sofa that I did for this show just as a more like a statement, with the same kind of fabric, and then I took the photo of myself and I displayed it in the museum together as a piece of work. So this was because what you will see today, also tomorrow, is how the identity that I was able to create kind of out of nothing became such a value for me as a designer, and to have that. And it was basically my fabrics. So my practice today and through the years is Path of Love, which is my brand. I'm gonna talk about it. It no longer exists, but it was for 10 years. The curator me, the teacher, the collaborator, and the weaver of people. Because one of the things that I do through a lot of my work is that I bring also people together. And part of the reason why I really love curating so much is that I am in dialogue with other artists, and it also, for me, it's just a different form of artwork, but the process is the same. It's the same as for me creating my own work. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Path of Love. Path of Love was a brand that I had in Reykjavik, Iceland, for over 10 years. Everything that happened in that studio, it was a studio with me and few other people. I had technicians, like you were talking about, and all the fabrics. So I would work with very simple fabrics from Europe, and I would decorate them, because in Iceland, when I came, I studied in Paris fashion design, and a few years later I came to Iceland and I started my own brand. And at the time, it still is like this, there is not so much resources. We have Icelandic wool, but that's it. So you have to kind of find a way how you want to do things in an interesting way for yourself as a designer. And plus, there was no work for me as a designer. There was no like company that I could apply to. We have maybe 2-3 outdoor companies. There is like one woolen company. I mean, today it's different, but at the time when I came back from Paris, there was nothing. There was like 2 fashion companies. Then there was the outdoor company and the woolen company. So what I had to do was to create my own company and to start. And I had to learn how to run a business. And I had to just figure things out on my own, and of course with help of a lot of people, with asking advice and things like this. And this is just to give you an example of, those were the 2 kind of signature fabrics that I was doing, and this was all mainly done manually. I would sit with a sewing machine, I would draw. Sewing machine has always been my drawing tool. There was the Flea Fro and the Planet, and I would do stitching all manually, just to kind of create my own couture-like fabrics for my collection. And I would always work with layering. I would also play with the colors in this way. I would work with different colored lining and different colored see-through fabrics on the top. And so that became a very big part of my practice. It's just like, how can I create my own fabric? So what happened is that people would recognize these clothing, and they still do. I would also use Icelandic wool, like I did here to the right. There was some sort of different type of fabric or manipulation. I would play with the cut. And just to go back here, what happened is that because I was able to kind of stay in this kind of mindset of, with my own designs, it was always very simple shapes, but the fabric was the main item. It was almost like more important than the shape itself, but it was combined. So I did this for 10 years, and I had a production in my studio, I had a store in my studio, and 10 years later, and I also had 2 kids during that time, and 2 girls. So I became a mother, and I became also mother of this brand. But at some point, 10 years later, there was a breakdown. So that happened to me too. I came to kind of a point where I was like, I cannot do this anymore in the way that I was doing it. And the reason why was that Iceland is a very small market, and I was constantly competing with mass production. So to give clothing the value with the time that it took to make them, blah, 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 it was very hard. It was a very successful business in a way, but I felt that I was carrying a very heavy load, and I couldn't see that it would ever change. And I was someone who did not believe in like sending my production to China. I still wanted to be very ethical and very, you know, I mean, the brand names was Path of Love because I put so much love in my clothing and things like this. But it was like a full production. I mean, we would produce skirts, dresses, jackets, everything from my end. I would bring the collection to Paris, to Copenhagen. I was able to sell part of my collection to a store in New York, things like that. So it was like the whole like idea of how, you know, just the dream idea of how designer works. But something in me, this was in 2007, just right before the economical crash, and something in me was like, no, I'm not gonna, I can't go on with this like this. I don't see it kind of growing and lighting up, and I felt I was a little bit stuck in just like manufacturing, producing something that people asked, and but still being creative. So I decided to close, and for me it was of course a big step to do it, and for a while I thought I would never gonna be able to do anything creative again. I was like, I'm done, I'm gonna learn something else. I'm gonna become a psychiatrist or something, but just not like you know, and what can I do? I live in Iceland, there's no other job to have. So I took a break from my work for some time, and for a few months I figured things out. I was able to kind of close my company in an ethical way, as ethical as possible. And I started to look for opportunities in different places around the world. So I had studied in Paris, and I had worked for Lee Edelkort at the time, who was a trend forecasting office in Paris. And I knew that they were located in New York, so I went to New York. There's a whole story around that I'm not gonna tell here today. It's a long story, but it ended up that I was offered a job. So I went to New York to work as their studio manager. I brought my family with me, my 2 little girls and my husband at the time. And we moved there for 4 years. And for 3 years, I almost did not do anything creative. I was just like, you know, working for this company, and but in the industry, so I was always working with creative material in front of me. And it came to a point that I felt that, okay, there's no escape. I have to go back in somehow, find my way back in. So I started to do different art projects. And my background is in fashion, but it's also in fine arts from the Radio School of Arts and Crafts. And so I decided that I would go back into my craft with more the mindset of the artists. And anyway, my clothing had always a little bit, I never considered it as fashion. It was just making beautiful clothing. And they happened to be fashionable also. But for me, it was never about chasing the fashion. It was more about just like, what do I want to make and how, and to make it beautiful. And one thing that was good about being in Iceland doing it, even if I had there were a lot of limitations because of the size of the country and the middle of nowhere situation, is that, and you can, if any one of you is familiar, for example, with Icelandic music, Icelandic writers, there's a lot of art going on in Iceland. And we have this mentality of just doing kind of whatever we feel like doing. So being a designer, it was also an asset and a good thing to be in a country where I could also just focus on doing the things the way I wanted to do. I did not have any fashion calendar. I did not have any pressure. I mean, I didn't even have We don't even have a heritage to build on. I didn't even have a, there's no fashion history in Iceland. I mean, not to speak of. So it's almost like you have a complete freedom to do it. So that was a good thing. And I think also that's part of why my identity became so strong in what I did, because it just was like, I was just doing my thing, And also the smallness of the country was another good thing that was there, is that people are so approachable. So it was very easy to reach out to find clients for what I was doing. So I could and I could understand the client very easily because the client was so close to me. So, but I decided to close. And for a few years I was working in New York, and it took me a while to get back in. At some point, a few years later, I am out of New York. I had been living in Berlin for a few years. I had been back to New York and then back to Iceland. And when I was back in Iceland, I got the opportunity to go to Bergen in Norway to do some digital weaving. And at this point, I had been doing my practice here and there, doing some creative projects. I had started to create exhibitions and things like this. And during that time, I had lost my parents, and my mother, she was a very elaborate knitter, and she used to knit sweaters with patterns from South America. And I went to Bergen to learn how to do jacquard weaving with a digital work, and I did this work here, which is called the sampler, and this piece has become really the source of the work I do today. And I'll tell you why, because in the sampler, and sampler is something that you do in, that was known in Europe especially, where women would do embroidery, and they would embroidery their identity into a cloth, and the sampler became their identity. So in my sampler, what I did is that I brought the patterns that my mother had knitted in her sweaters, and my patterns that I had used in my embroidery and in my work, and I brought it into one piece. And for a while I was very, I don't want to say obsessed, but I was very occupied with those work that comes from the South America, and I did other samplers that, in this work is a work that I did in Tilburg in Holland. It's also this type of jacquard weaving. Here I started a little bit creating my own kind of motifs or symbols, but I'm still also using very inspired visual language that comes from this part of the world. But here, for example, far right is kind of a mix of Icelandic folkloric patterns and those South American patterns. And I have even memories of myself sitting next to my mother, drawing patterns when I as a kid up that she would then knit. So this kind of work that was in her honor became very important to me. And that led me to another part of my work, which was somewhere in between. And this was also a way for me to find my way back into my own creativity. It was to recycle materials and yarns that I had in my studio and work with textiles in a different way. Not in the way that it has anything to do with fashion, but just more as a three-dimensional objects and materials. And I started to work with shapes and forms and building up layers of textiles. And this work was also kind of my practice back into work with color stories, because as you saw in the Path of Love collection, it was also a lot of work with colors. And here it became also that. So my work has also been, in the past maybe 10 years, it has been a lot about working very physical, like on a sewing machine still, where I built up textiles, I built up my materials, and then I'm also working digitally with either jacquard weaving or embroidery weaving. And so here I'm playing with like both colors, textures, and those kind of circled form that has been an ongoing practice for a very long time. And here I'm mounting up this is a very big work with those sculptural pieces of textiles, and it was an installation in the Icelandic Living Art Museum. And here is another, which is my first version of a work called Circles of Life. I've continued to work with that. And this is another work which was exhibition in Iceland where I did also, it was still very close to the passing of my parents, where I was working with digital embroidery, telling stories from my childhood, and then creating sculptural pieces with this type of layered, recycled, found material work. And here is the back of that work, which is called this is called the Roses of my father. He was a rose farmer, and I grew up with all colored roses in my house as a child. And this was a representation of that memory. But the reason why I'm showing you the back is that in my practice, this is another, because I'm very occupied, or the subconscious mind for me is a very important element, of course. But I like to, when I'm working with those bigger sculptural pieces, is that I'm focusing on the surface, and then I build up the back without really looking at it, the whole process. And I just bring either fabrics or colors or yarn while I'm working. And then it has its own type of work on the back, but it's not planned. It's really almost like accidental. Today, I have a studio in a place called Mana Contemporary, and it's in New Jersey, very close to Manhattan in New York. And in this studio, I work on my own work. I do my own work. I also run the company for Lee Edelkort in trend forecasting, and I also run the New York Textile Month, which is a month festival in September every year in New York. And we have also the World Hope Forum, so I'm doing different things in the studio, but also my own art practice. And what I wanted to talk about here, which is really what it's about for me today, and a little story about the ink drawings, is that in the past years I also started to paint. I started to explore different mediums, and for me it has been an experiment to see what happens when I do that. And what I've realized is that it doesn't matter what medium I use. The visual language is always the same. I'm always doing kind of the same things. And here, at some point, I wanted to practice painting in my apartment, and at that time, my studio was still in my home. And I could not, because the floor is so beautiful in that house, I couldn't do painting. So I remembered that when I was studying in Paris, I had been doing drawings with ink. So I brought the ink forward, and I started to do a drawing practice with ink from those motifs that I had been working from South America, from the motifs my mother had used in her work. And I did a daily practice, morning, evening, middle of the night, whenever. I created a sacred space of those where I would draw and sit. And those elements just started to have their own life. And they started to become something that was in me. And it was no longer linked to any culture, anything like this. It's just something that I'm projecting or translating. And they can be in form of stories, or they can be in form of a deity. And what happens is that I do those drawings, and I've been building up a work of art with this. And they are, and then I meditate on them, and they tell me what they're about. And so they are really the source of my practice, what I'm doing exactly now, those drawings. And this is a little bit how it looks like in my studio. Then they are translated into either embroidery or painting, and painting, or just embroidery, or different things. So I take those paintings and I translate them into embroidered work, or also paintings. And in my studio, I have a friend. I call him my boyfriend. It's Bobby. I'm going to see if I can have him play here. I don't know if I can do it. No? No, he's supposed to play. Let me see. So this is Bobby working for me. And so I have an embroidery machine in my studio, and so I'm back to working in this way, where I work with the digital technique, but I'm still doing the very hands-on physical work. This is one of my earlier work in this way, and what I started to realize when I was, I worked in the, started to work with a more art-driven, my fabrics for my studio, creating those motifs, the storytelling. I'm still working with the same it's about the layers. It's about the transparency over a color. I'm creating a colors. I'm really thinking about the textures and the material. And even with embroidery, I create those layers of embroidery. So my mind is always on the same, training the same muscle, which is this, where it attracts to the same place about the transparency, the element. And here it's the same. So today, and here too, it also becomes a collage. And these works are not very big, but they are, they vary in sizes. But you can see here it's also the mix of digital and the manual together. And the same here, this is painting and digital and manual. So today, for me, what is important is that I am working because I need to be working on my creative, training my creative muscle. I need to give it an outlet. It's not, and another thing is that I've come to a point where it doesn't matter what other people think about my work. I just need to do it. And that is a total freedom for me, and has been very important in my practice. And again, it's about the colors, about the texture, and it's about the storytelling, and also about the deities. And I'm still working a lot with recycled fabrics, everything I find. The color stories are always important in my work, and this translation of the black and white into color. And the same here. This is how it looks like in the close-up. My practice is very cross-disciplinary, and because, like I said earlier, for me it's important just to stay active. And even if I run this company for Lee Edelcourt in New York, it has been, what I realized is that my experience as a designer and running my own business in Iceland became a very good value to that I'm able to stay now and run this company, because I'm used to run a company. But today it's more about how do I step into my creative work, and then I need to do the practical work and all those different projects. And I just want to talk a little bit about the curatorial work too, which is, like I said, it's a way for me to communicate, to create a dialogue with other people. And I think for me, dialogue, community, other artists, because also I work solo in my studio today, this is a way for me to have other people in dialogue with me. And I also learn a lot about other people's work. Tectonic Threads was the first show I created in the US, and it was a show of 20 women, female artists from Iceland and from New York. And what I like to look at and what I like to talk about in my shows, the shows that I work with, is this dialogue between, it's mostly fiber art or textile shows, is this dialogue between people that are trained as masters and people that come from other mediums but are using textiles in their work, and they have learned by themselves how to do it, and also to work across generations. And this photo here really shows it. It's in the back, we have an artist that is from the generation before me, and then next to it is the young generation of artists who is a weaver, and then in the front you have Shoplifter, an Icelandic artist who is trained illustrator and sculpturist who never learned anything about textile but is very famous for her textile work. So for me this type of dialogues are important, and here you have a little bit, you can see what this show would look like, a part of it, and there's also this element of different mediums in the textiles that I'm very fond of. Vibration was another show that I created in L-Space in Chelsea, in the Chelsea neighborhood in New York, where I worked mainly with artists that are not trained textile artists, but work all in textiles. Many of them were painters, and they were all still working with textiles in their work. So that was kind of my main dialogue there. Birds of a Feather, also at L-Space in New York, was where I worked with 2 pieces of work from each artist, like a dialogue between 2 pieces. And what I also like to do, because I work with the MFA Parsons textile program, is to also include graduates of the program, and that also gives me the opportunity to do this cross-generational dialogue, which I think is very important. And in that show, actually, there were fewer of the works that were from graduates from that program. The Nordic Textile Takeover, it's another. The Nordic Textile Takeover is an exhibition event that happens at the Scandinavian House in New York. It's the second time it happened, and it's part of New York Textile Month. And what I like about this project is that I call it a project because I do it in collaboration with the Scandinavian House, and we organize talks, we organize workshops, and we bring in Nordic artists to come to New York. We offer them a space to meet and connect with people from New York. And then I usually create one show in the beautiful gallery they have there. And in this time it was all with a focus on knitting, because knitting is one of our oldest tradition. And it's the same here. It's a work of, the oldest work in that show was from 1972 by one of the Icelandic most recognized artists, Hildur Hákonardóttir. And then we had very young artists that just newly graduated, all in the same show. And here I'm also talking about the value of textiles in the art world today. So that is also a conversation that I like to bring up and bring into those exhibitions that I'm creating. Collaborations, that has been something also I just love to do with other artists, and I just wanted to mention a couple of them. One is a collaboration with an Icelandic jewelry designer where we worked on our heritage. We took a embroidery stitch that is handmade, and we are working on now translating it into jewelry. And so this type of work that I would not be maybe able to do on my own, I'm able to do it with someone else who has a different knowledge, different craft in their pocket. So that I love. Another one is that I've done also based on the Icelandic heritage is Doppelganger. It's a first layer knitwear collection that I created with another Icelandic artist when I lived in Berlin. And the last one I did, the fox works the part of love, and the fox is actually also on my dress. It's the only motif that has found its way to my clothing today, is the fox. So here, this was a collaboration I did with a project that is up in New York now at a place called La Suestara, and they are showing a collection of almost 400 woolen skirts, and they invited few designers to take one vintage woolen skirt and do whatever they wanted with it. So I kind of brought it to the Fox and my embroidery. This is, I'm going to talk a little bit about Dorothy Waxman, the Dorothy Waxman Textile Prize. Probably your students are familiar with this competition. This is one of the projects that I work on, and I've been doing it for about 5 years. This is part of New York Textile Month. It's a competition that we do every year in September. We open applications in the spring, and the focus is on textiles, fashion, and design. And we are looking for innovative solutions and innovative work of textiles from students that are either recently graduated or are about to graduate. And it's a competition where we go through 350 applications every year from people from all over the world. And one person gets the prize of $5,000. And this is something that Lee Edlicott started. It's now the 11th anniversary of this prize, and I've been directing it now for 5 years. And another project, which is a very big part of my life and also has allowed me and giving me openings to do those exhibitions, for example, New York, because it's a way for me also to use that platform to create exhibitions and bring people together. It's New York Textile Month. And this happens every September for 30 days. It's running in the city. And I think we don't run the events, but we are kind of an umbrella. It's about 80 to 90 events that happen every September, all about textiles. It can be workshops. It can be exhibitions, talks. There can be remote events. There are a lot of people now that come from abroad. They give lectures in their own country, and we keep it in our program. People visit from other countries to come and participate. Craftspeople, craft masters, artists, they come either to show their own work, give workshops, or they are there just to meet and greet other people. We also do a big webinar during that time, which is always the last Friday of the month, where we bring together people to have a conversation about something about textiles. So this project I took over, this celebrated its 10th anniversary this year. I've been doing it for 5. And I took over the project during COVID, and it is a project that Lee Edlicott, Philip Femano, and William Schenk, they started this 11 years ago. And but during COVID, I was asked to kind of take it over, to direct it. And at that time, of course, it was a very challenging moment because we weren't meeting in person. So we were able to create a whole online presence with this, and that changed everything, because what happened is that we got an international audience. So this grew, and we have a very big following, and it has become a very important meeting point of anyone who has anything to do with textiles in New York. And we have also schools participating. They show the work of the students. They open the door to the public so people can go and look at their facilities. There are always different exhibitions that happen about textiles. Companies open the doors. They show a little bit behind the scenes, show their processes. Lot of workshops, all kinds of workshops, and we have masters from different parts of the world coming to the workshop. So it's a very vibrant month. Many people, they say, oh, Textile Week. I'm like, no, it's a month. And that was not my idea. That was the idea of Lee Edlicott, who started it. But I think it's actually very nice that it's a month, because it's, we are really focusing on textile the whole time, and it has create a lot of discussions, lot of amazing conversations. So this is but all of those side projects that I do, when I'm doing exhibitions, even if I'm doing this, my artistic creative mind operates always the same. I always approach those projects the same way, even if I also need to be practical. It's kind of this balance between to be creative and resourceful and also very practical at the same time. So that works very well. This is, I just want to end with this slide here, which is my work called Circles of Life. And this is a combination of my physical embroidery, my painting, my digital weaving. And in a way, when I was showing this to a friend earlier or this week, and as a part of this presentation, I was like, this is kind of just me, like wearing many characters, and I have to take all those projects on. And it's really a journey, and it doesn't matter, and for me, what has always been very important, and like the story I shared in the beginning, when you need to be resourceful, you need to find a way, how do you want to do your practice? And it is to just really don't stop until you find a way to do it. And I think it is very important also to be able to be independent in the way you work on your creativity. So those are the circles of life, and I want to thank you. Here is my website and my Instagram, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
¿Tendremos alguna pregunta para Ragna? Perfecto.
Hello, thank you. Very interesting. My question is about the symbols. If you research about these symbols, do you use in your work?
So,
the South American symbols.
Yeah, so they no longer are the symbols of South America. The way I used it in the beginning was literally to take it from sweaters that my mother knitted in the 70s, because there was a movement in Denmark, which is one of the Scandinavian countries, called Hønsestrik. And Hønsestrik was kind of a hippie type of, like the hippies would knit. And there are amazing knit books from Hønsestrik. And they would show like very colorful dresses, skirts, sweaters, hats, everything that was very inspired by the Peruvian hats. But it was like you also had the feminine symbol, you had like, fish, you had like different, whatever. And I think at that time in the 70s, it wasn't about heritage. It was just about the style. And there was a big part of that was also about like man can knit, everybody can knit. And so it was really like a 70s moment. And she was very big on that, but she took it further, my mother, and she would go into books from South America, take those symbols, and she would like count them up and put them in a sweater. But that's like a long, long time ago. So when I started working with her work, it was not so much from where they come from, that it was like I'm working with a South American. It was more thinking about my mother working on this work. So working with those, so in my memory, I have memories of those sweaters, and I will show it tomorrow in the presentation, like I have pictures of them and how this kind of developed into what it became. But what for me became very important is that, I did this work of like the jacquard weaving, working with those symbols, not so much about researching about them, but really relating them to my mother. But then when I start to do this practice, those then become like figures, deities that are just coming from me without like, I'm not doing by anything. It's just in my own system. So they just come from this, and they are all kind of like abstract, whatever, but I'm not looking at anything. It's just something that is in my DNA. So whether I was maybe a South American in my previous lives, maybe, I don't know, but it could be. But it is really like that. So I don't really, there was a moment in this practice that I was like looking and I did a research. But for me, it's not about that. It's not about like repeating those patterns. This was really a very personal project that then became something else. And today it really has a life on its own. And those drawings really have a life of their own. When I sit down and I'm doing my drawings, I don't even decide what I'm doing. I just sit. It's like writing to me. It's a very intuitive process. And it can, of course, there may be some references that come in because it's something I've seen somewhere or something. But it's really not like about trying to mimic anything. It's really about me communicating and translating what comes out of my system. Does it answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I asked because I researched that,
Yeah.
and are many very similar symbols with the North.
Yes, and that's a very interesting point. Yes.
Your side. Yeah.
That's very
It's
interesting.
very
because
interesting.
That's a great point, because I've traveled to Morocco and I've been all over Scandinavia. And after I started to do this, working with those patterns of my mother and, what she used to take, and she had even like a pattern book called the Inca Patterns or something like that. In Morocco, if you look at the Berber work of the Berbers, it's the desert people, Berber. It's all there. It's all there. Like the beach, it's all there. It's the same, also in Scandinavia. It's different. But of course, I think there's a very strong visual language here, and then fragments of it you can find different. I think there's nowhere as strong visual language as it is in South America. But the fragments are more, like you can see in other countries. And that says also, because I also work in trend forecasting, where it's all about, that we are grabbing the ideas, what's in the air. We travel around, we see, we are constantly taking in, and we are all sensing the same thing. It just depends what we do with it. So it totally makes sense that those patterns and those visual, like those ornaments, they traveled around the world with the Vikings, with the, whoever was sailing around, because it was also part of the commerce. So, you can even see in Morocco, you can see jewelry that is like Native American jewelry, like the beads are exactly the same. It's like it could be, but it's from the Berbers, So it's and that I think is a very interesting thing to look at. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
¿Alguna otra pregunta para Ragna?
Thank you, Ragna, for such an inspirational talk. I'm really very inspired. And I don't know if it's a question, but I'm very curious about how in your personal process you manage to do all these different projects and still keep grounded to your own creative voice. So I'm very interested about that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. This is actually a big topic of my talk tomorrow, because something has shifted in me as a creative, because I left my craft once, and I still get emotional about it. And when I turned back, it took me a while to get back in. I just try, and it's almost like you're just, you're almost like rehabilitating yourself from an accident, basically. You're just like training I'm doing the knee, like that's how it is. And you just need to keep going, And for example, I moved back to New York. It's now almost 7 years ago. Then I had been in Iceland. I was the director of Radio School of Visual Art, the textile department. And I had my own studio there. And then I'm asked to come back to work for Lietl-Kort. And I was already very active in my practice. So I said to her, yes, I can come back, but I will be doing my practice on the side. And it happened so that I am a mother, but I'm divorced, and my daughters, they live in Iceland and they are older, so I kind of have all the time in my world outside of my work. You know, I work, but I can show up for my work whenever I need to. And literally, for example, when I started to do the ink drawings, they became a practice that would be when I woke up in the morning, before I went to work, when I came home at night. If I woke up in the night because I couldn't sleep, I would sit at the desk and I would draw. Like that's how it is. And what I learned with the time, the importance of showing constantly up, just constantly be doing, train the muscle. And it's complicated, and I'm very busy, and I'm actually starting a 6-month sabbatical from my work this January, and I will only be working 40% because I need to focus more on my art. So, I mean, it is not easy. It's complicated, but it's possible, you know. And it is something in me, like I'm so determined. That's why I say, like, I don't even care what people think about it. I'm just like, I just need to do this, you know. And it's really like that, you know. Of course, it's nice to get a good feedback, but it is, you know, today is just my need. It's my own. It's just part of my heartbeat, you know. So that's how I do it, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
¿Existe alguna otra pregunta para Ragna? ¿Dónde? Ah, ya, perdón. Lo vi.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I have a question. How has the importance of learning about textiles evolved in today's fast world, where production often overshadows process and material knowledge? Now, I know, and we all know that fabric and textiles are super important and have a powerful storytelling, but maybe into the fast world, it's for the public that we need to talk about this process. It's complicated to understand.
In the fashion.
In fashion and art, in textile art.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. It's hard for me to understand. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How has the importance of learning about textiles
Yeah, learning about textiles. Yeah.
involved in today's fast world, where production often overshadows process and material knowledge?
I think in many ways, for me, I'm someone who has kind of always, I mean, I learned like very traditional textile art. I never learned weaving, but I learned like printing and knitting and things like this. But but I've never been able to work by any rules. So I'm constantly breaking the rules anyway. And but for me, it has always been very important, the ethical part of anything I do. You know, that even the people I work for, that I pay them. You know, I pay an intern that works for me. It's not a lot, but I pay her a little bit, just because I feel better about it. But it's it's about also just communication, about, you know, how are you as a human being in the world. And that for me, my practice is also about that, when I do those projects. I'm no interest in doing it because I need to get somewhere. I'm only interested in doing that because I get to work with people and I get to create something that is valuable for me and for the community. And so anything that I think we do, it's about, what do you call it, like just that to have the right value in it. You know, the value in what you do. So we talk about fashion systems and, you know, changing the fashion system. I think what we are also talking about now is just like, forget this fashion system. Just we need to create a new system that just is different, that has the values that we all believe in and the way we want to work. Because I think also, and that is also for me, that's also why I'm going on a sabbatical, because I can't be this like 10 people person. For now, I just want to be more like focused on few things, not 10 things. And it is also, I think a lot happened to us during COVID, just the way we think as people, as persons. The kind of our value system really changed. Like, what is important? What do I want to do? And that's why also for me it was like, I need to be doing this. I need to be doing art. I'm never going to leave it. Like, I'm never going to leave my children. This is just part of who I am. And I will find a way how to do it, you know. So, but I need money to live. So I need work. So, you know, I make it work, you know. But I also am, I'm also selling a little bit of my work, you know. So there are ways, you know, to do it. Did this answer? Did it give it?
Yeah.
Kind of? Yes.
Thank you so much, Ragna. We are very happy to have you and that you can tell us about your practice. So we are very glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Bueno, con esto llegamos al cierre de esta jornada del encuentro. Queremos agradecer profundamente a todos ustedes, todos, todas, todos ustedes, por acompañarnos tanto de manera presencial como los que se están conectados en el YouTube de la Facultad de Arte y por seguir la programación y contenidos también desde nuestro Instagram, @amdt.puc. Estaremos ahí también anunciando las noticias sobre mañana. Un agradecimiento muy especial a nuestras invitadas, invitados, invitades por compartir generosamente su práctica, sus miradas y también, ¿por qué no?, sus preguntas. Sandra Matei, Loreto Martínez, Andrea Camarosano y Ragna, gracias por dejarnos más que pensar y crear y por abrir conversaciones desde prácticas críticas y por invitarnos a comprender la colaboración no solo como metodología, sino como una postura ética y política desde la cual imaginar y construir otras formas de hacer diseño. Finalmente, les recordamos, un cherry más, que mañana continuamos en el Campus PUC, Avenida Universitaria 1801, San Miguel, con 2 actividades abiertas al público, el masterclass de Ragna Froda, que hoy día nos acaba de dar un sneak peek de lo que va a tratar. Creo que es interesante poder ver cómo seguir nuestras prácticas incluso cuando tenemos que hacer muchas otras cosas y también pensar en muchas otras cosas porque así es el mundo, así es el sistema y así es la vida. Titulada The Inner Path of Creation en el Salón N113 del Complejo MacGregor y a las 6:30 p.m. el desfile de egresados en la Sala Pinternitz de la Facultad de Arte. Muchas gracias nuevamente y nos vemos mañana.